Welcome to the Demeere podcast. We talk about martial arts, self-defense, and a whole lot more. And now your host, Demeere.
Hello everybody, welcome to episode 26 of the podcast, and I have a special one for you today. It is a crossover podcast that I'm doing together with Iain Abernethy, who's a karate expert and who very much focuses on the practical applications of the style. Now, Iain is going to introduce how this came about a little bit, and I hope you enjoy it a lot. I had a blast doing it, and hopefully Iain and I can do this again sometime, because I think it's an interesting discussion that we had, and I hope you guys find the answers we gave to the questions you gave us to. I hope you find those useful for your own training. So before we get started, a quick shout out to one of my patrons, Guy Green, who has been supporting the podcast and my work for a pretty long time now. So I want to say a huge thanks to you, Guy, for your continued support. I appreciate it very much, and it's thanks to you and all the other patrons that all this is possible. So again, huge thanks. If you as a listener want to join me on Patreon, go to patreon.com/Wim Demeere, my name. And then you'll find everything that we offer there, lots of stuff there, hundreds of hours of video instruction and a bunch more. And it's what makes all this stuff here, the podcast, the blog, and everything else possible. So that said, let's get started with the podcast. Enjoy.
Hello everybody, I'm Iain Abernethy and welcome to this special joint podcast with myself and Wim Demeere. So as some of you will remember, a couple of months ago I was on Wim's podcast. At the end of the podcast I got chatting with Wim, told him how much I'd like to have him on my podcast, and we decided what would be fun was to ask the listeners to both our podcasts for questions, and then Wim and I would chat them around. So obviously, you know, Wim has a self-defense focus similar to myself, and Wim has a traditional background similar to myself. Although Wim comes from the more Chinese systems, where I'm more the Japanese and Okinawan system. So we thought that would make interesting viewpoints on common topics. So we threw it out to our respective audiences. We asked you on Facebook, social media, what topics would you like us to talk about, and we got great feedback. Wim and I then narrowed that down to questions that we thought would be of most interest to most people, and this is what you've got in this particular podcast. So I really did enjoy chatting with Wim. Big fan of what he does. Love how articulate he is when he expresses himself. I think there's some great information brought out in this podcast, and I'm sure you'll all enjoy listening to. So without further ado, here's myself and Wim discussing all the various questions that you gave to myself and Wim. Thanks very much to all the listeners for joining myself and Wim. The background of this, obviously, I've known Wim. We met at Mark McYoung's barbecue, but obviously I'm very aware of his work. I really like what he does, and I had the honour of being on his own podcast maybe a couple of months ago. So I wanted to get Wim on mine, and we thought, well, what we'd do is do like a joint podcast. And as you know, the listeners, we asked for questions from you all, and these are the questions you've got. So we're going to start with the first one, which Wim's got.
Yeah, so this first question I had is as follows. I'd be interested in hearing thoughts from the both of you on bunkai for Chinese martial arts forms. Any noteworthy variations in how forms are constructed in Chinese martial arts versus karate? Are there any useful rules of thumb for reading a form? Any differences between internal and external styles? That was a question, and I think you had a very similar one to this one.
I did, yeah. So it was, have you, meaning me, have you ever studied and broken down any kung fu forms? Has Wim ever done the same with kata? What differences do you see between Okinawa and Chinese forms? So it's largely the same question, and obviously that questions along them lines came in from quite a few people at this end. So. Well, I can answer the one, have I ever broken down a Chinese form? Well, I've tried to. So I have one of my friends also does Tai Chi, and when we were together once, he said, I'd just like you to kind of give your karate eye to this form. And so obviously I'm aware I'm viewing it through the wrong cultural lens, the wrong historical lens, but just using that, what can you see here? So I did notice some differences from the off when I tried to do that. The first thing I noticed was the fluid movement whereas karate tends to kind of freeze frame at various points, which kind of highlights the posture you're looking for. I found the fluid motion of the Chinese form means that when I was doing it in my karate mind, I was having to split it up into pieces still.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about purely Chinese martial arts, and this is just a couple points that I'll bring up, and we'll see if that resonates with you. There's no wasted movements normally in a form, so that everything means something.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, what you can see is that movements in a form can be a defense against a striking technique. It could be a throw or a takedown or a trip or a sweep or something along those lines. It could be a joint lock, or it could be a multiple opponent situation. Those are the broad categories that you can use to analyze movements from forms. And again, broad generalization, because obviously there's forms there are going to be styles out there where they have forms that don't completely fit into any of these categories, or they have a different take. There's hundreds and hundreds of different styles of kung fu, so it's hard to give a definitive statement. But that would be it. So striking techniques, some sort of throw, takedown, a joint lock, or multiple opponents. And those are the typical categories. If you look at the Tai Chi that I do, that's very often the case, where there's one movement and there's like 8-9 applications. Just the first movement in the form has about 8-9 applications, and pretty much all of these categories are involved. So that would be the first thing you do when you look at what is the inner meaning of forms. Another one, you mentioned it, Ian, is the cultural lens that you look through. There's cultural artifacts and stuff in there in, I think, all Asian martial arts. This is one, I think it was from Hungar, if I'm not mistaken. This is from an old documentary where I saw it, and then there was this movement with I think it was the halberd, so a long spear with a blade on top of it, for the folks who don't know what that is. And there was this movement where he pulled the weapon to the side, the teacher, and he moved his hand to the opposite side in a downward movement. And he explained that, well, this is not a technique, but back in the day, men were really long beards and mustaches, so he's just pulling his beard out of the way from the weapon. So, but if you watch it, it's very beautiful. It's a flowing movement, so it looks fine. And you could then start imagining, uses for that technique, but you'd be wrong.
Yeah.
And this brings us to one of the favorite topics of a friend of mine, and he calls it necromancy. It's just raising dead forms and interpreting them from our perspective. So that's one example. I'll give you quickly another one. In one of the Kuntao forms that I learned from Bob Orlando, and that form has a very strong Chinese influence. There's symbolism in the salutation. For instance, you make the form of a triangle between both thumbs touching and your index fingers touching as well, and you hold it out in front of you, and it looks like a triangle if you look in between those connecting fingers, and that symbolizes the mountain, and that symbolizes perspective. And the whole idea of that is that you look at a violent situation from a distance, take some perspective as opposed to jumping right in. So there's no immediate application, but there is a very strong symbolism and there's a very strong reason why it's in the form. Before we start fighting, take a step back, get some perspective, and then decide how to act, which is a really good self-defense lesson. So that's cultural stuff that is sometimes really hard. I don't know if that's present in any Japanese forms, but that's really something that I found in many Chinese styles. Yeah. And as a final point, and then I'll go back to you, Ian, I didn't see any differences between internal and external styles per se. It's mostly between styles themselves that they're very different. Yeah, that was it.
No, that a lot of that resonates with me. So, in terms of the historical oddities that we get, I mean, there are a few techniques within the form that revolve around gripping the top knot. You know, the hair as it was worn at the time. Where a lot of these forms, which again, you know, I always say hipsters are bringing it back. Your cat is great for fighting samurai and hipsters. You know, it's so that's, you know, we have to make some adaptations. I think another one, you know, for the application, a lot of the techniques things have moved on legally as well. So there's techniques that'll take a guy down and stomp on his skull. Well, obviously that's what the form does, but when we practice it with a partner, we tend to shift that to a stomp to the legs or something like that, you know. So there's changes like that. In terms of for analysing, my key three things are the angle, and I'd be interested if on whether this one applies to the Chinese form. So I'll maybe do this one last. So the first one is I always look at the hand positions. So what are the hand positions doing? Is that, as you say, is that a lock or throw? Is that a joint lock of some description? Do I recognise what the hands are doing? The other one is the stance, which is an obvious one. You know, that shows you the weight shift. So am I pushing forwards? Am I pulling? Am I sinking? Am I rising? That's again will help. You know, if I'm rising, it's like to be like some kind of rising strike, some kind of rising joint lock or a throw, something like that. So that gives you some kind of intricacy. And going back to the differences between the Chinese forms, that was one thing that karate tends to, in application, you are supposed to flow through the stances, but in the kata it highlights them by freezing on them. And when I've looked at the Tai Chi forms, obviously they don't do that, you know, which you know, it's flowing. So when I've looked at them, I've had to, what is the weight shift that's actually occurring? You know, that's one thing. But the big one that is very misunderstood within the karate is that the angles in the forms, you know, as you change position, represents the angle you assuming relative to the enemy. It's very misunderstood that. And then Kenwa Mabuni, the founder of Shitoryu, all the old masters regarded him as being the man when it came to kata. He, right in the 1930s, he said, the purpose of angles in kata is not well understood. And this has led to people saying things like, this kata is for fighting 8 people or some other such nonsense. And then he then goes on to explain that, you know, most of the time you're dealing with something to the front, and the angle represents you taking the best tactical position by shifting to the left or the right, or sometimes even trying to get behind them. So do the angles in the Chinese forms have a similar significance? Or is that...
Yeah, yes and no. Chinese forms tend to get complicated, and I'm going to caveat that a little bit and say that, for instance, the Tai Chi style that I practice, that I've been practicing for well over 20 years now, there's one form. That's it. Only one. I've done other Chinese styles where there were well over a dozen different forms, from very basic ones to very intricate ones. So again, it's really hard to say, well, this is a general statement for all Chinese martial arts. So I'm mainly speaking from my personal experience. What I find, for instance, in the Tai Chi that I do, there's the angle that you're following is in relation to your opponent. Like you said, so getting a better position. But also what happens is, for instance, many movements, and not just in the hand form, but also in our weapon form, the attacker is not in front of you. You're defending against an attack that's coming in from the side or even from the back. So that's a completely different way of looking at it. And the idea is that, well, you don't have time to face the guy. You don't have that time to reposition, reorient on him, and get into a proper fighting stance, so to speak. So you have to move from where you are. And that ties in with what you said before about the flowing movements. One of the reasons why you do flowing movements is it's because you are working really hard to go from one place to the other, for instance, from a back stance into a front stance as you do a forward punch, for instance. And you do that slowly so you can really control getting all sorts of very specific mechanics right, but also that the moment that you end that technique, everything gets delivered at the same time. We call it everything begins and ends at the same time. So your punch, your weight transfer, your hip rotation, your shoulder rotation, your arm extension, it all is timed, so all the force is delivered at the end at the right time. And I'm oversimplifying. But then the point is that as you do that, you need to be able to flow into whatever direction you need to go next. So going slowly and flowing through the movement also teaches you to not only coordinate everything in a certain way, but also transition into the next movement in as fluid as a way as possible, so you have a lot of control over transitions. And then when you speed up, then you try to maintain that control. So you move really fast, and you have a lot of control over those movements at the same time. That's kind of the one of the aspects of it.
Yeah, no, that makes that makes sense. I think that's one of the the issues with the Japanese forms. Well, you've got lots of discrete lessons that have been put end to end as well. So when you're doing the kata, you've got unrelated sequences transitioning together, if that makes sense. So originally, a kata would be something like say 24 two-person sets, and then what happened is they put the solar representation of that end to end, and it's knowing where one ends and one begins. The word bunkai, literally means to chop into little pieces so one can understand, to dissect. And again, I think that's one of the issues. So you do get the moving from position to position, and sometimes those transitions are combative, and sometimes they're what I call linking steps. It's just putting them together. See, one of the big ones as well is most of the karate forms, they tend to go forwards for a certain distance, then they turn around and they come back. So often that big turn in the middle, people are always, well, is that turn a throw? Is it a pivot? And I said, no, what that throw represents is that the originator of this form couldn't afford a bigger dojo. That's what it represents. It's simply like jackknifing the kata back in half so we can come back the other way. So sometimes those angular shifts, if you like, are just simply the fact that it's folding back, and same with those transitions. But I think, like you say, you do have the nuances, but I think when it gets down to it, I always like Gavin Mulholland once said, he said, our styles are not what we do, it's how we train what we do. So, which I always thought resonated with me. So I obviously do see some differences in the way the forms are constructed and the various elements, but I think the end result is largely similar. We're both systems are looking for the combative efficiency, that good movement, the sound tactics encapsulated in the form. So they may record it a little bit differently, but they're ultimately trying to achieve the same thing.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Well, I think that's.
That should cover it.
Yeah, I think it should be enough. So I'd be interested in your definitions of principle-based training and how you guys apply it in your teaching and training.
I was introduced of what we call nowadays principle-based training by Bob Orlando's book, Indonesian Fighting Fundamentals. And that book was published, I think, well over 20 years ago. It's a really great book. Bob eventually became my teacher. I invited him over to Belgium for seminars. I trained with him a couple of times in the US, and then I became a student. So I have a little bit, not as much as his other students, but I have a little bit of experience with how he would teach. He unfortunately passed away 2 years ago. Now, that was the first time that I saw somebody go really into depth about principles. This is the kind of stuff that before that I would recognize sometimes with teachers and in systems, but it wasn't explicitly stated. It was just there, and they understood it, but it didn't verbalize it. Bob, on the other hand, what he did, he says, look, these are fundamental principles that you find in Indonesian martial arts. And obviously, he didn't mean like this is, for every single martial art, every single principle is going to be exactly like the way I say it. That wasn't the point. But it's about recognizing principles. So I would very much recommend that book, and I will put in my show notes a link to the book, so because it's a great book to have, and just see how. And then there's videos of Bob on YouTube that you can see him training, and then you can, if you know the principles, recognize them and see what he means with that. So that's one thing. The way I use it is I use it as a teaching structure. So what that means is that principles are a foundation of whatever art that you teach, and they should be manifested in everything you do in training. Now, that doesn't mean that they're absolutes, because the principles interact with each other. And I'll give two examples. The first one is adherence or adhesion, which is one of the principles of both Bob's Kuntao and the Tai Chi Chuan that I practice. And that means that you stick to the other guy. Once you have contact, you stick to the guy. Don't necessarily push or pull or whatever, that's something else, but you maintain contact. Okay, what if the situation suddenly changes and you need to let go and create distance? Then you need to abandon that principle, because you still need to get to the end goal of getting to safety and surviving the encounter. So that's one example. Another one from Bob is whiplash. One of the principles is whiplash. So you move somebody one way, so he reacts by resisting, and then you use that force against him to move him the other way, which is what was your intent all along. Okay, and there's a bunch of techniques that use that, work great. But what if he really outweighs you significantly? What if he's a really big, strong guy and you're a petite woman and he outweighs you by 100 pounds and you can't generate the force necessary to pull it off really well? Then you need to abandon that principle. If it doesn't work for you, then in this situation, then don't follow it, because that would be suicide. So that's what I mean with principles. They interact and they're not absolute. Sometimes a little bit more of this, sometimes a little bit more of that. And that brings me to something that I've written about in the past, and I've annoyed people about this for years, which is what I call Randy's Law. And again, I'll put a link to the article in my show notes. And Randy's Law says that the differences are just as important as the similarities. So you can say, oh, this principle, this and this and that, blah, blah, blah. But if in the context there is one aspect that changes, that makes it radically different, even if it doesn't look like that on surface level, you need to take those differences into account. And that's a little bit of my criticism maybe to people who are always going on about, principle-based training as the best thing ever, is that it sometimes, not always, sometimes uses an excuse to not really have a good teaching structure, to not really follow a really solid teaching methodology, which I'll get back to that in one of the other questions. And free play alone isn't enough. You don't just spar, you don't just work freely. Depending on what you need to learn, you need structured teaching as well, and then principles are part of it. You don't become a jet fighter by just getting in a plane, taking off. You're not going to be able to because you don't know how, and then just pew 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 shooting at other people. That's not how you become a jet fighter. You need a lot of study and structured training and training that one area builds upon the next one and so on. But there are fundamental principles of flying an airplane. There's lift, there's drag, there's fundamental principles that you cannot ignore. You need to understand these. And eventually you need to be able to do a dogfight in the air. Basically, as a jet fighter, you need to be able to fight with your airplane, which means chaos and a lot of stuff and that need and creativity and so on. But before you can do that, you need to know what the laws of physics really mean for an airplane, and somebody needs to teach you that in a really structured setting.
Yeah, that's
so,
a really
long story. Go ahead.
No, that's a really good point. I was smiling when you said, that they'll use it as an excuse for unstructured training, you see. Because to everything you've said there, I get that and fully agree with it, you see. But I thought that observation there made me smile. So from my bit, it's exactly the same thing, and it takes us back to the forms a little bit. So I'm lucky that and I don't know if this is because I've self-selected my teachers or something like that, but all of them have been principle-based instructors. They've never been, they've never got lost or stuck on the technique. It's always been, here's the technique and here's the principles that it embodies. Exactly. And the important thing is that you understand the principles. So at seminars, I always use a line from Enter the Dragon, right? Because everyone's seen that movie, but there's that bit where Bruce Lee's teaching the teenager at the start, keeps slapping him around the head every time he does something wrong. And there's a bit where he says, it's like a finger pointing at the moon. The kid looks at the finger and he slaps him across the head again and says, don't fixate on the finger or you miss all that heavenly glory. So I always say that the examples in the forms, that the techniques, the drills that it shows are not supposed to be the end, the be-all and end-all of everything. What they are is they're an illustration of principle. And what you need to do is understand the principle, explore the various ways in which that principles can be enacted and applied to the point where that principle becomes habitual and it's something that you fight in accordance with, as you say, when it is appropriate to do so in the situation, and changing according to your goal. I mean, that's principle based in itself. So there's a hierarchy of them too. So I always say, you learn the form, you learn the applications for that form, you identify the principles that form embodies, and then you gain live experience of doing it. But one thing I found is people struggle with the word principle. Sometimes if they come from a very technique centered approach, they'll say, well, show me a principle. And I'll say, well, here's a principle. You keep the enemy in front of you, but you're not in front of the enemy. So I'll show them some various ways of moving. And then they'll go, I get all those techniques, but can you show me the principle? And of course you can't, because a principle is ethereal. You can show it how it manifests itself in various scenarios, but you can't show it. And I know some people struggle to think at that level, you see. But you need to, because the aim for me is you get it internalized so the principle becomes habit.
Well, and I completely agree with that, and what you just said about people, show me principle. One of the things that I like to do is look up the dictionary definition, because people often don't understand what a word means because they have their own interpretation of it. And I've got it in front of me here. Principle. It's a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system or belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. And second definition is a general scientific theorem or law that has numerous special applications across a wide field. And that second one is what I think is spot on for martial arts and self-defense. And it's a general theory, but it has special applications in the field that we're talking about here. So of course, this is one of the things that Bob did all the time when he would teach, and he was extremely methodical. He was a programmer, so he taught in math and so on. And he often said, like, look, I'm going to these are the principles. We're going to do an application now. And then he would say, this is perhaps not the best application in the world, but it really illustrates the principle well. And I think that's a key point when you teach. It's like, you want to know a principle? Look, I'll show you something where you can see it in action really, really well. And then when we do something else where maybe that's a better technique, arguably speaking, but you might not see the principle as easily, but you can recognize it because we've done this other more explicit version of it in this other application.
Yeah, no, that makes sense as well, because sometimes, of course, like you say, there's never just one at play. When normally when you're doing any combative motion, there's several all interacting, as you've mentioned. So sometimes what you'll do is you'll say, well, I'm going to try and isolate this one a little bit. So, for example, I've got I taught it this weekend, a fairly long drill on controlling limbs. So it's essentially what it's very good for is that idea of sticking. That you never lose contact with the limb when you do it. Well, if you look at it as an as-is technique or a representation of a fight, it's wanting because there's not a lot else going on. Why is the enemy just sitting there allowing you to stick to his limbs? Why isn't he moving back or forwards? Or but as you say, what we're doing is we're isolating that specific skill, that specific idea, and then you've got other drills where you put it into context and give it its application.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that would nicely cover that one. Well, just as an aside, I talk about principles a lot, but the terminology principle-based training isn't one that is part of the lexicon really. But I do like it. It's a very nice term for I think how arts should be practiced really. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah,
well, for me, it's more along the lines of kind of like duh, of course. when you're teaching, you're supposed to be doing that anyway. And we talk about this in martial arts a lot, but when you go to other fields, nobody makes a big deal out of it because they do it by default. That's the default position. We need to teach principles and so on. So martial arts is funny sometimes.
No, it definitely is. And for me, where this, I'll tell this story, then we can move on to the next one. But before I was a full-time martial artist, I worked as an electrician. So I remember when I was serving my apprenticeship with my electrician, it was, okay, here's Kirchhoff's laws, here's Ohm's laws, here's Boyle's laws. Yeah. These are the things that you need to understand as an electrician. Now then, when you go on to a plant, every single piece of kit can be different. Whether I'm working on like a socket in an office or a crane, I worked in like a nuclear industry, so some really high-tech stuff. And I remember talking to, when I was nearly at the end of my apprenticeship, and where I was at the time, it was said to be the most advanced control system in Europe. So I'm a 20-year-old guy, I'm just finished my apprenticeship, and I'm like, man, this is some complicated stuff. And the guy who was my apprentice in the final couple of months I was apprenticing to, he said, no, it's not. This is none of it's complicated. And he goes, look, let's get a drawing out. So he gets a drawing out, and I look at this drawing, and man, this is blowing my mind. It's way too complicated. He goes, no, tell me how that bit works. So he pointed out a small bit on the diagram. So I read the schematic and see what's going on. He goes, well, that's all it is. He says the complicated stuff is just lots of simple stuff. And again, that again hit me saying, oh, yeah, this is just like, the martial arts that have been taught to me. It's always boil it back to the basics. And then what seems very complex becomes very simple, which is why I like principle training, because I don't do complex. My brain struggles with that. If people show me anything, I'm always like, I need to wind it back to core precepts. So I'm told that was one compliment I got at the seminar. You're very good at making it basic. I thought it's because I can't do anything else. I haven't got the intellect to get complicated. I need it to be simple. So yeah. So
okay.
Second one from you, Wim, I think is
yep,
that.
Yep.
Right?
So here's a question for you, Iain. How to preserve health even while training, including sparring, even while training very hard during many years?
Yeah. Well, this is one that I talk about a lot recently because I've realised that, so I'm 47 now, and I've realised in the last couple of years that I'm not 20.
Join the club.
Honestly, and it's still a semi-state of denial. I keep chasing personal bests I set, years ago, and so. But I think for me, the two things I think any good approach to martial arts needs, and this is my personal tick sheet, but I always say anything that's going to be of interest to me has to be life-preserving and life-enhancing is the two that I say. So in terms of life-preserving, that's to function in high-risk situations, but it also needs to make sure that it's going to make you live longer, it's good for your health. And then when we come to life-enhancing, I don't want a martial art that's going to cause me to have knee problems, to live with constant pain, to live with constant aches. So it has to keep the body functioning. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm fit and I'm healthy. So and that of course that can juxtapose a little bit with the combative efficiency, because when you're in your 20s, I want to go fast and hard, and but at a certain point you've got to say, okay, this is going to take its toll, and if I want the longevity, I've got to train a little bit more intelligently. So for me, I think it's always just been mindful of it. And again, it mentions including sparring. So this is a good example. When I was in my 20s, we had a Wednesday night session, which is when we'd put the gloves on and we'd spar, like heavy contact for the entire session.
Yeah.
And you'd come, you'd end up with batters and bruises. Thursday morning was not unusual to wake up with headaches. And there comes a certain point where you think, I'm not sure that I'm gaining anything from doing this, and there's a risk to my health with doing it. So that was something we kind of phased out, I remember Bertrand Ingle, the famous boxing coach. There was an interview with him in Boxing Magazine, and he was saying that, he's trained many world champions. And he says he doesn't get any of them to spar full contact. They train full contact on, they fight full contact on the night, but they don't train that way. And he had this phrase where he said, the only time someone should punch you in the head full power is when you're getting paid millions of dollars for it to happen.
Yeah.
And that resonated with me. And that was the point. I think, okay, it had its place when I was younger, but I've got to realise that, I have to look after my body, and I want it to function for me. So anything that would harms my body, I now try to avoid.
Yeah, excellent. Right. Well, I've got a list here of stuff because I as some of the listeners know, my main job is being a personal trainer. So I've trained many people. I've also helped people as a third level care person, in a sense that they go to a doctor, then they go to rehab with a physical therapist, and then they end up with me because the rehab isn't really over, even though the therapist says it's over. Let me put it differently. A couple of things that I learned, and also I've had several surgeries throughout the year. I just had my shoulder repaired December last year, and I'm finally finished with rehab. So I have some experience in this field. You only get one body. You get one body, and you're stuck with it until you die. So maybe treat it well. Let the stuff heal. You can spar, it's fine. You can spar hard, that's fine. But if something's messed up, if you feel pain, that means that there's something wrong. So listen to your body and fix it, and let it heal. And that means going to the doctor. Sure, you're a macho man and you're tough as nails. I know, but go anyway. And if a lot of people have frustrating experiences with doctors. Okay, go for a doctor who has a sports medicine specialization. If you can't find one who specializes in martial arts, they exist. But if you can't find them, any sports medicine specialization is fine, because they look at you differently. I had a doctor who took care of me while I was competing, and he was a sports medicine specialist, and he knew that he shouldn't say, well, rest for 2 weeks and take this pill. That was not an answer that was on the table. He said, okay, you can do this, you can do this, do not do this until you feel this. And that is what you want to hear as a martial artist. And there's something that I often tell my clients, my personal training clients, when they are injured and so on. So you have to look at injuries as a sliding scale. So on the left side, that's early stage of an injury. And there's a bunch of treatments that are possible there. And in many cases, just letting it rest, letting it heal up is all it takes. And then if you don't do that, it progressively gets worse until you hit like a checkpoint, Once you go beyond this point, a lot of the previous possibilities are off the table forever. They don't come back because it's degenerated into a more severe problem. And then other treatment options are possible and so on. And then you slowly slide along the scale towards another checkpoint, and it takes even more options away. And eventually, this keeps on happening until there's a point of no return where the doctor is going to say, it's too late. We can't do anything for you. Live with it. I have lasting injuries from all the hard sparring and hard training that I did that will never, ever go away. I've got my bicep tendons have calcified, is what they call it. It's not calcified, but they are more stiff. That means that they can snap. So I am no longer allowed to lift the really, really heavy weights I used to. And I know that it might happen one day that I'm just throwing a hook punch and that my bicep just tears off. So that's on the table for me now, which means I train very differently. I still train hard, but not in the way I did before. And rest and recovery becomes so much more important. So that is another point I want to mention is recovery is the most important thing. When you train, especially when you train hard, you're breaking down your body. It's when you rest and sleep and eat and recover, that's when you get stronger, faster, and so on. So focus on recovery as much, perhaps even more than you focus on the training. And quickly going over my list here. So train around injuries. There's almost always something you can do, even if it's not what you want to do, but just train around the injuries. If you do get injured and you need surgery or whatever, do the rehab. You only get one shot at rehab, and then it's done. And sometimes it's permanent. For instance, my shoulder surgery, so I had a labrum was torn, and supraspinatus muscle was completely torn off. So they reattached that, and my surgeon said, "Yeah, your tendons were kind of fighting us." Normally, when I pull on a tendon to reattach it, it's fine, and yours pulled back. I said, "Okay, my body's stubborn." So. But I did my rehab really, really well, and I saw my surgeon back after a month, and he was surprised. He said, "This is the best result we could have hoped for." But I worked my ass off, and I was crying tears of pain when I did my first month of rehab because I knew that I was only getting one shot. So take care of it. And the last point, sparring. I love sparring. I'm going to do 4 more years of it, and when I'm 50, I'm going to hang up my gloves. Don't go all out all the time. It's not necessary. It's counterproductive. What I like to do is you work in periods of high, medium, and low intensity.
Yeah.
You mix it up. Don't spar hard all the time. It is the stupidest thing you can do. One of the main reasons for that, even with headgear, even with big gloves, we know now that every single punch to the head causes trauma. It's we talk about being punch drunk, dementia pugilistica, all these kinds of stuff. We know now, we thought it was a cumulative effect. We know now that it's every single punch counts. Every single one. It's not just that you get 5 light ones and then you end up knocked out. No. Every single blow to the head causes trauma. So be very careful with how you want to end up later in life. Done. That was it. That was my list.
Yeah, no, it's really, really good. There's that thing of, we do the martial arts, people, especially if they're self-defense focused, it's, well, I do it to keep myself safe, or we need to make sure that the gym or the dojo is not the most dangerous place we go to, and that applies to the short and longer term as well, I think. So making sure that you're mindful of it and then training accordingly. And again, you may need to make some compromises because, I think male ego kicks in a little bit as well. Everyone wants to go hard and fast, but sometimes, as you say, we've got to override that and listen to our bodies a little bit. But your advice there is superb. I had to laugh when you said about the doctor as well, because my doctor was exactly like that with me. "Okay, Ian, you need to rest it." "Yeah, okay." "Yeah, no, I mean it though, Ian." Because I know you're not going to rest it. No, honestly, I will. Of course, I leave and I don't rest it. So because again, as you don't as a martial artist, do you? But I've had bad injuries where I've had to. But as you say, most times you can work around it. Like when I busted my knee up, I was literally sitting on the floor punching the bag. I couldn't stand and do it, so I did it from a seated position. Yeah, it's still something, So
no, totally.
Yeah, that's a good one. Lovely.
I've got
next one.
When you know a self-defense situation has to be addressed with force, how do you train to ensure the force is sufficient to ensure your safety, but not so great as that it places you on the wrong side of the law? That's a good one. I like that one.
It is. It's a really good one. I'm about to. I've written a podcast that I've yet to record just on that topic. So and it is absolutely crucial. For the self-defense side of things, you just can't ignore the law. And I find that a lot of martial artists, because they understand their martial art really well, they either don't know they need to, or they can't be bothered to add in all the extra skills and understanding and knowledge that a true approach to self-defense needs, and law is one of them. People just get lazy, so they explain it away with, better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, or in a street fight you haven't got time to think about it. So on the first one, that's a false choice. As Rory Miller says, your choices aren't just prison or death. You can make sure that you defend yourself effectively in a way that's legal. And the point about you can't consider it in the heat of the moment is one I agree with completely. In the middle of a scenario, and I can't be sitting, what does the Criminal and Justice Act 2008 say about reasonable force again? But you can think about that when you're constructing your training. So my big thing for the self-defense side of things is to try and have our drills condition the right habits, so it's not something the students need to think about. So for UK law, reasonable force, it has to be honest and instinctive action. It says that you're not expected to judge to a nicety the level of force used. So I'll let the students know this, so I know it's not about getting it exactly right. No one's going to prosecute you for hitting with slightly, too many pounds per square inch or anything like that. And the key thing is that you train with the objective of escaping rather than defeating or winning, because therefore it's very difficult to argue legally that you crossed to the wrong side of the law because you escaped the instant it was safe to do so. So that's one thing that we make sure that we do, that our drills don't end with guards up looking at one another or anything like that. They end, we do all in our bunkout drills end up with people running away. So we condition the habit that as soon as that the person's been sufficiently disorientated that it's now the right time to run, we instantly run away. And when we do that as well, we're very mindful of the way that we retreat will be perceived. So if you run away with like a guard up or screaming or kiaing or something like that, that can be perceived by witnesses as you being an aggressor or admiring your handiwork. Witnesses can get things wrong. So we practice running away, hands up in a passive gesture, stay back, don't hurt me, so everyone's clear on what's going on. So my thing would be is to make sure that your drills, understand what the law is, then make sure that your drills are in accordance with what the law is, that encourage legal action, and that you're mindful of what how it will be perceived by others. And then the final thing I would add in is that it's always good. I have a handout that I give to students that this is what the legal procedure is if you are interviewed by the police about a self-defense scenario. So things that you will be expected of you, rights that you have, advice that I've got from judges, magistrates, and police officers and a police trainer about what you should and should not say in what stages, you see. So we try and cover it completely so people don't accidentally get themselves into trouble. Because, of course, the people aren't judged on what they actually did. They're judged on what is perceived that they did. And it's making sure that the perception is right. You don't inadvertently make things more difficult for yourself. So that would be the broad thing for me without getting into specifics.
Okay, that's really great, and I was deleting stuff that I was going to say because you covered it all. So I only have a few things to add. I would say train for different levels of intensity. Not every fight is to the death, even though it could be. But if you're stuck at a party, or whatever, and this guy's really drunk and he takes a swing at you, but you can see it coming from a mile off. You don't need to hit him 50,000 times and re-stomp the groin, as Mastercan likes to say, a dozen times. It's not necessary. Train for different levels of intensity, and you need to have clear triggers. What I mean by that is that you need to know when you kick it up a notch to another intensity level. For instance, you're facing one guy, all of a sudden, second guy shows up. And it's 2-on-1. That changes everything dramatically. You are facing a guy and he's in your face and blah, blah, blah. And he's just, verbally aggressive and threatening and blah, blah, blah. But he doesn't do anything. And then he pushes you and you deflect it and you're fine. And then he pulls a knife. Suddenly changed. And a final example, you're alone. It's one thing. Or you're running into trouble when you're there with your wife or with your child. Totally changes the intensity of the conflict. So you need to have clear procedures in place and triggers like, okay, if this happens, or this is how I handle these kind of things, and when this element changes, that is my reaction. Because you won't have time to think things through on the moment itself. Do it in training. And then two quick things. Your whole point is not to win. So your point is to survive and get away and to get home in one piece. So you don't need to beat the guy. It's not a sparring match. So focus on ending it really quickly. And the more you focus on that, the safer you are, usually, because the quicker it's over, the less chance of you getting hurt, but also the less chance of you doing overkill and hitting the guy too many times, and then you end up on the wrong side of the law. That was it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and then that's key again. Just drilling to the objective each time. So, like we do scenarios where you've got to protect this person, you've got to extract this person. There's now we're going to do multiple opponent scenarios. We run through them all with the aim of conditioning the right habit based on that external stimulus. The more people practice it, the more likely they are to make good decisions in, like you say, well, not even decisions, the more likely they are to react in the right way under pressure. And the other one I'd just like is that I think this is sometimes when martial artists come to self-defense, it's a problem they have, is because they generally have a defined. So, for example, like say you train in Thai boxing, great system, but you're training it primarily for the ring craft of it. Your objective is always, I need to beat this guy until he's unconscious. Now, and then if you don't practice other senoarios, self-defense wise, all you have is, I need to beat this guy until he's unconscious, which could be too much if you say it's the drunk guy at the party. It could also be problematic if there's more than one guy and your objective, there's an escape option which you don't see because you're thinking of beating the guy till he's unconscious. So I always think it's very important to drill the specific scenarios we know we like to face and work for those. So. Make sure you get it right in training, which is what we've both said.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Right. Okay. So I think I'm gonna have a look at our list.
Your turn.
Now. So I'm gonna pick one from your list for you, Wim. So I would like something about the red flags to look out for when joining a new martial arts gym or in training in general, and are there common themes that should make you cut and run?
Yeah. So I just recorded a podcast episode, and it's on how to choose a self-defense class or instructor. So that should be out by the time that the listeners are listening to this episode we're doing here today. So, and that's the way to get there is go to wimsblog.com/25, number 25, and then you can listen to that episode where I go into detail about picking a self-defense instructor. Lots of stuff. I'm not going to cover it here, but that is a lot of red flags there. I've written 2 articles about that almost 10 years ago now. So one is called How to Visit Another Martial Arts School or Gym, and the second one is How to Train at a New Martial Arts School or Gym. I'll put links in the show notes, and that should give a lot of information, a lot of details. Generally speaking, what I would say now is that if the instructor or the students, they're bragging about how great their style is and so on, if they're not really welcoming when you show up, if they're really strict or not strict at all, if you see all these little things add up, that you're going to say like, well, this is kind of, I'm not sure about that. You need to start questioning, is this a good idea to train here? You could be wrong, but trust your gut a little bit. For instance, you need to see hard training, good training, but it needs to be fair. If you see guys taking cheap shots and being a little bit of an asshole to each other, you might not want to train there. And what I most of all would do is look at the students and especially the instructor, size them up like you would any other stranger you meet for the first time. If somebody creeps you out and they give you a really uncomfortable feeling, well, trust your gut and leave. We do this all the time. When we're walking down the street, somebody walks up to us and asks us a question, you automatically size them up, you're scanning for danger and so on, well, you should. So you don't know this person and you don't know what their intentions are. Same thing when you go to a class. But the difference is that you're going into a class full of strangers and they're all specialized in breaking bones and beating people up. So you might want to pay attention to their nonverbals and how they act and how they are towards each other. And most adults, by the time you're 18, 19, you have plenty of experience just getting in contact with people you don't know and trying to make a judgment call. We do this automatically, instinctively anyway. What I would say is make it a conscious choice of just being aware what these people are like and just trust your gut. Look at all the podcast episode and the articles that I said for a lot of details. I'm not going to give you a list of 50,000 items here, but most of all, it's about just human interaction, and you have to feel welcoming. I was in the US last year, and I went into a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym just to watch. We were walking down the street, and I saw that there was a class. Like, cool, let's just go in and watch. The students were practicing. It was a white belt class. Everything was flowing. Everything was fine. The instructor and the assistant were really hands-on and supportive. And the instructor, he's a black belt. He came over and he introduced himself. He said, "Hi, can I help you?" and this and that. And I said, "Oh, we're just here to watch." He said, "Yeah, sure, fine, sit down." And it's a very welcoming atmosphere. I do the same thing when somebody shows up in my class. I make sure my students know what to do, and then I walk over, introduce myself. "Hi, can I help you? Any information you need? You're free to watch. You can sit here, and if there's anything, I'll just let me know, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes." And I think that's the best way to go about it. And then if turns out that those people are there for bad reasons, you'll as a teacher you'll find out really quickly. But 99 times out of 100, you act like a normal human being and you expect the same treatment and result. That's it.
That's sound advice. And then not settling. That's exactly like you say. If there's something that you think this is off, well, then don't train there. I think sometimes is that like almost like an unbalanced power dynamic. Or they're the sensei, they're the instructor. I have to kind of accept all the shit they throw my way, and you don't. Excuse me. If you go to a club and it feels wrong, then go somewhere else. It's amazing sometimes how much martial artists will put up with. They'll tell you about how they to endure this awful instructor for years and years and years. Well, just don't. Just go and find somewhere else. It's too important. Your time's too important to spend it with people that aren't fun to be around. And as you say, that's the thing. I do pride my own club on that. I've got a really nice group of people there. Every visitor we get is made to feel very welcome. Everyone's warm and welcoming, and they look after visitors. And I think new beginners are people that great. We're so pleased you want to be part of the family. We'll look after you. We'll help you. Take your initial baby steps and stuff. I think that's a feeling you want. And if anything feels off, then don't train there. Go find somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's like I said before, that there's all sorts of levels of intensity and different kinds of societies. If you're living in a really rough neighborhood, chances are that if there's a martial arts gym there, that it's going to be a little bit more rough around the edges, and that's fine because that's the environment you're in. If you're in a high-priced neighborhood, let's put it that way, you'll usually find a gym that it's a little bit cleaner and it's very family-oriented and so on. But if you live in let's call it the bad part of town, the gym might be really rough and not family friendly. But that is the environment you live in. So you need to just like you said, you need to find a place where you can feel like, okay, I belong here. I can be here. This is fine. This is for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very true.
Okay.
So let's have a look at what would be Wim's advice to martial artists when it comes to weightlifting.
Okay, I've got a huge list. I'm going to I like to prepare for these kind of questions because it's so easy to misunderstand. And then I say something, and then all of a sudden I get an email by somebody who takes offense at it, and they interpret it. I try to be thorough. As you guys know, I'm a personal trainer for a living. I've been working for well over 20 years like that. So I've written books about it and so on. Anyway. My point is this: you need to have, it's a really good idea to have some sort of conditioning when you practice martial arts. That in Okinawa and karate, they have many conditioning drills and equipment that they use. Mm-hmm. So we're not saying anything new here. In the Tai Chi Chuan style that I practice, we have what we call Neikung. Other people use the term Qigong, which is it's internal work. It's a sort of conditioning method. And we have other conditioning methods as well that we practice. So I'm a big believer in that. The difference is that you don't want what we call brute strength. We want trained strength. So it's okay if you want to lift weights, but the goal is not just to lift weights. The goal is to use that additional strength in your techniques. So that should be your primary goal. If you lift to lift, it's fine. If you enjoy that, it's great. I enjoy that too. But that's not the goal. So as a martial artist, the conditioning that you do needs to be a supplement to your training, and it needs to make you a better martial artist, not make your bicep bigger. So with that in mind, I would say be in it for the long haul. So take your time and go for long-term results, as opposed to I need to gain, 10 pounds of muscle by the end of the month, so I can look good on the beach in my swimming trunks. That's not it. Quickly, some technical stuff. So movements in weightlifting and conditioning, you need to understand the difference between what is called a primary mover, secondary mover, and stabilizer. So when you do a movement, for instance, chest press, you have primary mover is your chest muscle, secondary mover is going to be your shoulder and triceps, and stabilizers are, for instance, rotator cuff. I'm oversimplifying. You need to understand which muscles are you training, what is their job in the movement. There's loads of books and videos out there that talk about that, so that's not going to be an issue. But you need to understand what you're doing, because only then can you have proper technique. And if you have proper technique when you lift weights, that's when you make progress and when you avoid injuries, which is the whole point. I said it before, rest and recovery is just as important as training. So hugely important. So don't overlook it. And then there's something called periodization, and I will add a link to the show notes about that. And that is how you structure training, for instance, over a period of several months or even several years. This is, in my opinion, one of the holy grails when it comes to conditioning. You need to use periodization. Every single professional athlete uses it. If they don't, they're idiots, because it works. Now, we can talk about how you apply that. That's different. But you need to have a structured schedule in your training. Otherwise, you're going to overtrain, and you are going to, like the bros say nowadays, you're going to lose your gains, man. So you need to structure it. It's hugely important. And I'll put a link to that, to a really good book about periodization by Tudor Bompa, who's the godfather of periodization. That'll explain in detail. Boring book, scientific, boring, but very, very important. When I started implementing that, I made enormous progress, and that was after almost 10 years of lifting weights. So that said, technique-wise, people always want to hear techniques. Okay, if you're going to start anywhere, learn a decent squat and deadlift. So squatting, deadlifting, you need to learn that. And proper techniques of squat and deadlift can take up to a year easy before you master the basic form, because it's very technical. Add chest press and some sort of rows or pull-ups for upper body, and then absolutely add core work. Core work means abdominals, deep back muscles, and so on. And I would like to point you to a couple of exercises that are good in addition to that, and that is more for the stabilizers. So go on YouTube and look up shoulder stabilization, rotator cuff, shoulder blade exercises, core exercises, and in particular what is called the McGill 3. So McGill, Professor McGill 3. He has 3 excellent exercises for the core. Start by doing that, and it's a really good place to start. And then quickly, a couple of things that that will help you for more information. I very much like Dr. Michael Yes's 1x20 program. I've used it for several years now. He came out with it several years ago, and it's one set of 20. That's where you start, and long explanation, but it works really, really well for beginners. It's really great. Even advanced students and practitioners of weightlifting can make a lot of progress with it. And it's surprising because you're not training as hard as you are before, and you still get better. So I'll put links to that in the show notes. So Dr. Michael Yes is 1x20, a really good book to understand conditioning and strength training in martial arts. It's called The Science of Martial Arts Training by Charles Staley. I very much recommend you read it. It's going to make a lot of sense, and you'll understand better what you can do. And then a final one, and that is my power control video. I made that a few years ago, which is strength training and conditioning, very specific for martial arts body mechanics. And it's a general system that can be applied for many, many different kinds of martial arts. And you can tailor it to your own needs. So I'll put a link to that as well. And then the final one, I'm 46, been training with lifting weights since I was 18. So your training is going to change as you get older. So change with it. Don't be afraid to, I'm not allowed to train with really heavy weights anymore. I would warm up with my chest press with 100 kilograms. That was my warm up. That was fine. But my neurosurgeon said your spine is actually not that good. So you're not built for that kind of stuff. You have a really small foundation and you put a skyscraper on top of it. So I haven't trained with really heavy weights in years. I haven't lost that much strength though. So you have to change as you get older. That was it.
Oh, that's excellent. There's really loads of good advice there. So about 20 odd years ago, I did my weightlifting qualifications.
Yeah.
But I'm aware it's all way out of date now. You know, I mean, the science moves on. So what I was taught that long ago, has now been superseded by researchers. But I've always weight trained. All my instructors have always weight trained as well, and I found it to be very beneficial. I take it, obviously you're the same, Wim. You've never had any experience of these negatives that martial artists sometimes purport to have. Like makes you slow or makes you stiff.
Only if you do it the wrong way. Only if you, for instance, follow what too many martial artists did. Is follow bodybuilding schedules. That's not your. I mean, if you remember the K1 fighter Jérôme Le Banner, the French guy, really big heavyweight. He was one of the top K1 fighters in his day. And he once said in an interview, they asked him, "What do you do about weight training?" "Yeah, I do just bodybuilding, so because I like to have big muscles and it makes me feel good." I was like, "What the hell? I mean, you're a professional athlete. You're not supposed to do stuff like that because it's no use. It's not about mass. It's about function." So. Yeah, if you train wrong, sure, you'll be slower, but train the right way, and there's tons of material that will teach you how.
Yeah, and then that's it. And looking for a training program that's congruent with your goals as well. Because you say if you hit YouTube, like a lot of the advice you're going to get is cosmetic. They're not looking for functional advice, and they're certainly not looking at it from functional from a martial perspective as well. So for us, it definitely needs to be a supplement, and you've given them loads of stuff to. Yeah, I've been making notes there, so I'll be hitting the internet as soon as this interview's finished. Try to update my knowledge a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So the next one then, who do you try to emulate in the martial arts and why?
Okay. There's a couple of people that I try to emulate in a sense that they taught me a lot. So this is quickly. I don't often get a chance to say that. So some of the people that I have a debt of gratitude for them teaching me. So first of all would be Dan Doherty, who's the head instructor of the Tai Chi Chuan style that I practice. He's a Renaissance man. He was a police officer in Hong Kong. Has a law degree. He's a Tai Chi Chuan master. Very few people that I would give that title. He competed in full contact competitions and won. He speaks Mandarin, Cantonese. He can translate ancient Chinese texts. So he's a true Renaissance man in the martial arts. And if anything, I try to emulate that as much as I can. Somebody else, Patrick Couder, my main Tai Chi Chuan teacher, who's one of Dan's students, is a very humble man, but he's very, 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 very highly skilled. And he's one of the most generous teachers that I've ever had. And here's the thing, I didn't know that, but he's also an artist. He makes amazing art, and I didn't know until Dan told me. And then I asked him, I said, yeah, I do this thing. He wins national competitions and so on. So he's very humble. And when I get a big head and I think too much of myself, I try to be more humble like my teacher. And then there's Lauren Christensen, who's my mentor and writing partner sometimes. He has an immense depth of knowledge and experience, but he still keeps training. He's had injuries, he survived cancer, and he's still training. So that is something that I try to follow. And he's also down to earth, and he always keeps it practical. One of the things I really learned from him is just keep it simple. It shouldn't be too complicated. Keep it simple. And I try to follow that example a lot. And obviously, I cannot forget Bob Orlando, my teacher. He was also an extremely generous and kind man. But what I learned most of all from him is to be a better teacher. He was one of the best teachers I've ever met. And then the final one is a friend of mine who's not a famous martial arts teacher, is Jerry Sheila. And we got to know each other almost 20 years ago, and we started arguing, and we had what is still called the Tai Chi Chuan Wars, because we discussed this really hard. He taught me that he's much smarter than me. I'm like the dumb guy in the conversation. He's really smart. He knows so much more than I do. And he taught me that the value of a discussion lies in the exchange. It's not about winning. It's not about beating the other person. It's about having an exchange. And that was a lesson that I needed to learn when we first met. And I've tried to follow that ever since. That was it.
Yeah, very good. Obviously, my teachers, all of them, that's why they become your teachers, are people that you wish to emulate. They've all got characters. I've got Doug James was the guy I originally trained in. Doug's an eighth Dan. Trained his entire life, great teacher. They've got Peter Considine, who's obviously very knowledgeable guy, very wide-ranging set of skills, and his work ethic is incredible, and his intelligence in the way he trains. Peter's 69 years old now, still trains like a crazy person, but he's been able to train that hard because he's also trained intelligently. Brian Seabright's a guy that I train with regularly. Brian's, again, his speed and skill and his humour is just something that I really admire. When I was training under judo, I did under Mike Liptrot. Mike's one of the best teachers I've ever come across. His ability to break things down and to be goal-specific in his teaching is really good. But for me as well, any martial artist I come across, I'm always looking for something I can steal. So if somebody does something well, I'm always like, okay, I want that punch, or I want that person's flexibility, or whatever it is I can see from somebody that I think that's an admirable trait, or that's a skilled ability. Then I'll try and use that as my own inspiration. So students provide that as well sometimes. Like I had one girl who was she made a full recovery, but she was undergoing chemo and all that for cancer. She's still at the dojo every single time. Doing what she could. So it stops me kind of whinging, about how I can't train because I've pulled my shoulder a little bit. You know what I mean? It's like, that was like, okay, she's doing what she can in the way that she can, and that's something, we can't always go full bore. So yeah, there's lots of people out there to emulate. And then of course I do the converse as well. If you find people that you think, well, I don't want that person's attitude, or whatever it needs to be, if they're doing that, I need to guard that I don't do that myself. So yeah, always looking to learn from other people.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah. In karate, there is a big focus on searching the kata and its true meaning. How come everything is not clear and there is a need to research and do reverse engineering when it is known that most of the katas come from kung fu? Risky. Why not go to wide crane and long fist to find the real meaning of bunkai? Okay, I'm gonna leave that one to you.
It's a really good question though. So and there's a few parts to it. So I'll briefly discuss them all. So how come everything's not clear is the first one. Is that karate, like most of the Japanese martial arts, got swept up by that Do revolution, and maybe swept up's the wrong term, because if karate hadn't adopted what was the zeitgeist of the time, that prevailing ethos, it would never have spread. It would have been a thing practiced by a handful of Okinawans that died out a few hundred years ago. Itosu, Funakoshi, Mabuni, people of that era, particularly Funakoshi, had the vision to go, right, judo is huge, is huge. So let's copy what judo's doing. It's no longer karate, it's karate do. We're going to steal judo's ethos. We're going to steal the grading system idea. We're even going to steal the suits that they wear. We're going to steal their form of competition into Ippons and Wazaris. They just wholesale ripped off judo to make something that would be popular, and it worked. But a big part of that was it was spread through the university system in Japan. So with university students, you've got them there, 4, 5, 6 years, and you're not really doing it for combative function. You're doing it for the health and the physical challenge and all those kind of things. So you've got people learning a lot of forms, because you've got limited time. You've only got them for 4 or 5 years. You've got people learning a lot of forms very quickly, with the objective no longer being combative efficiency. Now, Funakoshi himself makes reference to this. He said, in my day, we studied narrow and deep. Today, they study shallow and wide. In the past, they'd learn 1 or 2 katas to great depth. Now they're learning a lot superficially. He remarks in his writing, he says that the karate of today is not the same as the karate of 10 years ago. And it's a long way indeed from the karate I learned in Okinawa as a child. So Funakoshi was clear that there'd been this against evolution. As part of that evolution, the bunkai got dropped. You then get a generation of karate teachers who kind of take their best guess, and what they tended to do was they tried to superimpose onto the kata the idea that you're fighting another karateka from a distance, and that caused all kinds of problems. When we read what the past masters were saying, they say, no, it's for fighting in self-defense, so not a fellow martial artist at close range. And when you look at the forms in that way, they make a lot more sense. So that's why it became unclear. And then since, for the last, whatever it's been, 30 years, there's been a concerted effort to get back to the roots a little bit with it. I think we've had a lot of success with that. To the point where I don't really think we're reverse engineering anymore. I think, we maybe on occasion, but I think for most forms, people can say, here's a full set of applications and drills that are entirely consistent with everything we know historically. So they may or may not be the exact same drills that were practiced in the past, but they're certainly fulfilling the exact same purpose, so the point where students are learning forms and applications side by side. Now, in terms of going back to Kung Fu, that is true that Okinawa's, it's a series of islands. It's an important trading place. It's important tactically, militarily. So therefore, you get a lot of people coming and going. And there's no doubt that various styles of Kung Fu, if we can use that term to describe them all, have been a big influence on karate itself. But these are lost, a lot of them, So, for example, Kushanku is a system we've got. Kushanku is a Chinese martial artist who inspired a form that was created by Torii Sakagawa. This form is widely practiced, but nobody knows what system Kushanku did. The other thing is, as well, the question infers that the systems themselves haven't undergone any evolution. So one of the things I've got a police training manual, a Chinese police training manual, and in that, it's written in the 1930s, in that the guy, it could be somebody talking about modern karate today. He talks about how, the forms, the applications have been lost. People are now concerned with just how it looks. The Chinese systems have also had these influences. And the final thing would be, of course, is it's not just those forms as well. The Okinawans had their own martial arts, and the Japanese had their own martial arts, and that's all got squished together into what we now call karate. So I think that's the various elements that the question addressed. Obviously, you can and have write books on any one of those elements.
Yeah.
people have done that, but that's the general thing.
Yeah.
I think.
And I mean, I agree with what you said, and the only thing I would add is that the same problem exists in Chinese Kung Fu, is that a lot of people are looking for the meaning of what's in the forms, because it's lost. Obviously, we had in Chinese martial arts, we had communism take over in China and basically try to eradicate traditional martial arts, and we have modern wushu, so modern Kung Fu, which is in many ways just a very diluted version of it. What was meant for health, but not at all. If you're taking over as a totalitarian system, a huge country like China, you don't want to have a lot of locals really well versed in the art of combat. So they wanted to get rid of it. So there's a lot of information that got lost there. And that brings me to the true question. The real question here is, why does information get lost? And in particular, us as Westerners doing Asian martial arts. Dan told me once that don't forget that we're doing a Western interpretation of an Eastern practice. And some things don't translate, and some things we really can't understand because we're not Chinese or Japanese. And it's a very different experience normally for them in their home country, or it used to be. In the Chinese system, it's all way too often. It was just, okay, just shut up and do it. And eventually you're going to learn everything. And if you do it, if you can do it right, the way your teacher shows you, you'll be able to pull it off in a fight. That was a goal. And eventually you will see everything that is in the system, because the teacher was a father figure. You were with him all the time, and you're supposed to listen and obey and just do as he says, and just stick with him. And eventually he will show you the whole thing. I don't agree with that practice, but that's how it used to be. So it's easy to see how stuff gets lost in such a way of teaching. And another thing, particular to Chinese martial arts, is that you need keys to unlock some of the forms. Keys meaning certain information. And we have in our system and in many other Chinese systems, and in Asian martial arts in general, there's inside the door and outside the door training. Inside the door means that you go through a ceremony basically of saying like, look, I'm going to be a good student, and the teacher says, I'm going to be a good teacher to you, and I accept you as my disciple. And we are going, it's not religious at all. It's just a typical Chinese thing. And then you're in the family now, and now we're going to teach you everything. People who do not go through, it's called baishi. So that ceremony, you're there outside the door. They still learn, but they don't learn everything. And I've seen this consistently in all Asian martial arts, this kind of practice. There's the public stuff. You've got omete and ura, I think, in Japan.
Yeah,
you've got a public phase, private phase. Same principle. I've seen it in Indonesian arts. I've seen it all over. So that's how information also gets lost. And then specifically for forms, for instance, in Chinese forms, many movements are obscured on purpose. So that lets you practice when other people watch and they can't understand what it means. So it's on, for instance, we have movements where in the form we step back, but in application you're supposed to step forward, and vice versa. And you do it left, but in application it's supposed to be right. And that leads us to a concept that we have in our style. It's called true transmission. So you need a teacher to transmit the art correctly to you, so that stuff doesn't get lost and that the system isn't broken when it is transmitted. And that happens all the time.
That's really, really interesting. I mean, I guess a follow-up question would be, well, why are we studying arts when we know they've got holes in them? Why not just study a modern martial art where these holes don't exist? I know that's sometimes one that I get. And to which my response would be, well, I don't, those holes came up historically, but I think we've done a very good job in plugging them to the point where the system is now back to being complete. Again, it may not be historically exactly the same, nor should it, because it's evolving. And your point about we're doing a Western version, I think that's really true. I say to my students all the time, we're doing a Western version of a Japanese version of an Okinawan version of Chinese arts. You know, it's kind of moved on. And again, and knowing the karate that I do, I can see that Western influence. You know, there's invariably, like, you know, the pad drills we do, there's some boxing elements that have came in from my teachers, certainly in the way that we practice it.
Yeah.
Even culturally, like, you know, so things like the formal bowing and stuff, I've really minimized that in the last decade or so, because I realise I'm just not Japanese. I don't fully understand elements of that culture, nor do I need to for what I want. I understand that people do, and you know, culture, studying other cultures is a fascinating and important thing. But for my objectives, I don't need it. So I freely we bow, but we'll also tap gloves. We have the Western stuff as well. So yeah, I think that's. Lots of ways we could go with that one, but I think we've answered that question. Okay, I think there's lots of information for both practitioners of Chinese and things. So I've got one for you, Wim. It says, if you had to start over again in a completely different martial art, what would you study and why?
I'm going to answer that one a little bit in an obscure fashion. There's a friend of mine, and I'm going to call him the keeper of Nessie, and he knows who he is. And he has a style that he practices that I would have loved to be his student. It couldn't happen because of a variety of reasons. He lives across the world, so it's not practical. I'm too old now, and so we won't be able to get that done. I would have loved to study his system. He knows who he is. He prefers to be low key. He prefers to stay out of the limelight. So I'm going to respect that and not say his name. But if he's listening or whoever listens to his, you know, he knows. So I have to leave it at that.
Yeah, that's I like that. That's a modern mystery. I love it.
I have a wide variety of friends from all over the world that are very special people. Let's put it that way.
Do you know, I think this is the thing with martial arts. It does bring you into contact with, I'll use your term, very special people.
Exactly.
Well, obviously, for me, the reason I started karate was I knew I wanted to do martial arts, and that was the nearest club to me that had a good reputation. So it wasn't like I sat down and thought, right, let's weigh up the pros and cons of every single martial art in existence and find the one that best suits me. So there's like most of us, we end up studying the whatever system we fall into, you know.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I fell into karate because it's worked for me. It's appealed to me. You know, it's given me what I mean. I've dabbled with other systems, but the karate works. But I think what attracts me to it. And I mean, I'm not one of these people that goes, art A is better than art B. I think they're all good. There's good and bad approaches to any given martial art you can think of.
Yeah.
But what appeals to me on a non-functioning level is I like feeling part of a tradition, and I like something with a bit of history behind it. Now, that would make no difference to combative efficiency at all. So if someone invented a fantastically effective martial art tomorrow, it wouldn't really work for me on a personal level, because I need to feel part of that tradition, and I like something with a bit of history. Even though I'd be stealing its good ideas, but I'd be making it part of my traditional system. So for me, it would probably be something like Japanese jiu-jitsu would work for me. Probably any number of the Chinese forms would work as Chinese systems if I had to start again. Because, I'd like ones with forms. I like something with history. I like something with some depth. So it would be one of those. And it would be because I like something with tradition. I like something with history.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the question was, how would we both critique the state of sport competition versions, both forms and sparring events in our respective styles? So karate for you and Chinese martial arts for me. So go ahead.
Well, I can make it. I've been out of that scene for a very long time, so I'm not the right person to ask about it, really. All I will say, obviously, there's a big concerns and excitement about the fact that karate is in the 2020 Olympics. So that one comes up a lot for how that may impact karate as its practice. I don't think it will really, because you're talking. It's not going to be one of the main highlights. The only time it'll be on the TV is if someone from your country happens to win a medal in it.
Yeah.
And then they'll provide some time for it. I am happy for the people that do the sports martial arts, that it's going well for them, that they've got that Olympic recognition. I know these are people who train really hard and are very dedicated what they do, and I really admire them for that. I think so long as you judge all the sport against its own criteria, and you don't judge it as a how would one style of competition fare against another style of competition, or how relevant is it to self-defense? If you acknowledge it for what it is, it's good, it's wonderful. I'm happy people are doing it and enjoying it. It's not really for me.
Okay.
That's all I could really say on it.
Yeah. I'll quickly talk a little bit about that, because so Chinese martial arts, the sparring system is called Sanshou or Sanda. I used to be the national coach for Belgium. I competed in that as well. What I've seen is that I stopped practicing that and teaching that a few years ago. I switched to mixed martial arts because I really like it a little bit better. Let's put it that way. There's more possibilities, there's more versatility. I can be more myself as a competitive fighter in MMA than I ever could be in Sanshou. So that's one thing, just for me personally. But also, Sanshou is actually dying out internationally and in China too. I've got one of my students who regularly visits China, and he says, he started with me in Sanshou, and he said, I can't find a gym here. He says MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's what you see there growing. But traditional martial arts and Sanda or Sanshou in particular, it's not getting bigger. Quite on the contrary. And I've seen the same thing happen in Western countries. So I'm again, like you, I'm out of that part of the art for me. So I'm no longer following it. Forms, again, modern wushu forms, they don't interest me. I don't follow them at all. The Tai Chi style that I do, there's competitions for that as well. Forms competition is sometimes fun because it's interesting to see interpretations of other people, how they do the forms that I practice. I did a little bit of pushing hands competition. That was fun too. But again, I did my competing back in the day. I had a lot of fun with that, but I'm 46 now, so it's not really a big deal for me anymore. I still like to train hard. I still like to do the sparring, all that kind of stuff, but I don't really follow it as much anymore. Same thing with the pushing hands competitions. I look sometimes, a video comes my way and I'll look at it and it's great, but I don't have any plans for competing again or training people for that. So it's not really my wheelhouse anymore, kind of like you.
I will, for the forms thing, obviously you see, I used to obviously compete in both.
Yeah.
And I was a tatami chief, a mat chief at national level for forms competitions. I used to judge them at the high level. And then they brought in the rules where for team bunkai, if team kata, they have to do bunkai at the end, and that's when I stopped.
Yeah.
Which may seem odd to people. It's because, again, the bunkai that you see demonstrated in those forms, I just couldn't be seen to endorse that, because to me that's not bunkai, that's gymnastics.
Yeah.
You know, and I get it, because, like, you know, who wants to see kind of like a 3-minute demonstration of eye gouging and throat slapping? You know what I mean? It's not visually appealing. You know, I understand that, but and again, I admire the athleticism of those who do it, but it's not really for me. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
I think
you
we have everything.
catch.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, Iain, I want to thank you for the invitation and the idea of doing this, because I think I had a lot of fun. This is always fun. It's kind of like I'm a big nerd, on martial arts nerd. It's like if you put two Star Trek fans together and they're talking about all these details. That's kind of how I feel about martial arts. And it's a lot of fun. So this was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, you know, me too. No, and again, it's something fresh. You know, I hope for my guys who listen to this, obviously with your background and perspective, you know, there's lots of like new and interesting bits of information that I'm sure people will enjoy exploring, and some new insights in there. So thanks very much for sharing all that with us. I appreciate it a lot.
Oh, my pleasure. And maybe we can do this again sometime in the future if the people enjoy it. You know, I would say to all the listeners, let us know what you think about this podcast, and if you want to hear more of Iain and I just talking like this and discussing topics that you give us, I'm up for it. I would love it.
Yeah, me too. Well, one thing we can say, we're like, you and I can do this again. It's just whether we record it and let them listen. So, you know, yeah, if you want a recording of it, let us know. We can press record.
Excellent.
All right, Wim, enjoy the US.
Okay, thank you, Iain. Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, I found that to be a really enjoyable conversation. I love how Wim thinks and how he's able to articulate his viewpoints, and I hope that you found that as interesting and enjoyable as we did. As I say, it's definitely something we'll be doing again. And many thanks to everyone who submitted questions to both Wim and myself, and the great talking points that I think made for an interesting discussion. So yes, thank you very much for listening, and we'll both be back with more information for you soon. Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wim Demeere podcast. For more information, go to www.wimsblog.com.